Well, loneliness comes in a lot of shapes and sizes, doesn't it? Even before phrases like social distancing and self-isolation came on the scene, loneliness was already epidemic in our world. In 2018, Cigna did a pretty large national study showing that 54%, that's a little over half of Americans, reported living lonely lives. And when they repeated that same study, like only a year later, that percentage had grown to 61%. That's 3 in 5 Americans are lonely. You know, throw in a couple years of wearing masks and working from home and sheltering in place and avoiding any number of conversations with our neighbors because of hairpin sensitivity to nearly every social issue. And you got a serious problem. But perhaps this problem isn't societal for you. Perhaps it's not theoretical. Perhaps it's personal for you. It's about a week after his funeral. Extended family has left. She's got no appetite to eat any of the food that people have brought her. The fridge is full, but the home feels empty. She feels alone. Parents drove off just an hour ago. The kid has just finished getting his things kind of settled into place in his dorm room. He's on a campus with 1,000 other freshmen, but he doesn't know a soul. He feels alone. Crowd of 1,000 in a room about this size. A couple's going through a hard time. And they calculate, they kind of figure, probably 100 others in this room right now that have gone through similar difficulties. But what's it matter? They're not ready to talk about it yet because it's just too raw. And the couple feels alone. Feeling stuck in a cycle of addiction and shame, stuck in paralyzing depression and anxiety, stuck in singleness, stuck in a bad marriage. There's just a lot of ways to feel alone. Loneliness is common, but it is a uniquely powerful kind of pain. Perhaps it's driven you or someone close to you, someone you know, to consider an inappropriate relationship or even suicide. That's a powerful pain. Maybe you've heard that insight about trauma, that line. Humans can endure incredible suffering. So what makes trauma traumatic isn't the suffering. It's the feeling of suffering alone. That's what makes it traumatic. The Bible has some really good news that you are not alone. You're not alone. It really is good to be sharing with you today. Eddie actually asked me to preach today on this date a while back. By the way, he wants me to let you know that he's doing well. And, I told you last week that he'd gotten COVID, but that it was a mild case and he's back to normal. And so, don't worry about him. Sharon's doing fine. And the plan is that Eddie will be right back up here on stage next week as we kick off a new series, just as long as we can keep him away from those pregnancy tests. Those are tricky. So from the time Eddie asked me to speak on this, I've had some weeks to mull this over. To be more honest, I've probably had several years to mull this over. Because I remember very clearly when this word loneliness showed up on my radar for the first time. I was in my mid-20s. I was really tired of being single, really longing to be married. And I was enjoying my work as an associate campus minister on a university campus. And so I was, in my job, I was connected to a lot of different kinds of people, a lot of peers, plenty of colleagues, loads of acquaintances, and I knew and was known by a lot of people, certainly at a superficial level and even, quite a few at a medium depth. And all of that absolutely had value in my life, but something was clearly missing. I had an empty feeling. And I didn't have a word for it yet. But whatever it was, I could see that it was coming out sideways, sometimes as depression, other times as anger. And at some point in all that, I found myself in some kind of small group setting with my church. a group of people from my church, and I honestly don't know what it was that prompted this comment. If it was the time when we were kind of gathering prayer requests, when we were about ready to pray for each other, or if it was like part of the discussion. But I remember someone in the group reported that she had been feeling lonely. And it was like a bolt of lightning that struck me. It was like, oh, that's the word. That's what I've been feeling. That's what I am. I am lonely? Lonely? Is that the word? I mean, I know I'd heard the word before, but I'm telling you, man, in that moment, it felt like a completely brand new word. And hearing another person use it, courageously, vulnerably, labeling themselves with it out loud so I could hear them, like that unlocked for me just enough permission to claim that word as my own. It felt like, for the first time, in my feelings of aloneness, I was not alone. There is no doubt we are wired up for human connection. In 2010, a team at Brigham Young University did a really enormous, large-scale study, a meta-analysis of 148 studies in search for the strongest predictors of human longevity. You know, what factors in your life seem to be the best predictors of how long you'll live? Pretty valuable question. And they were quite surprised to find that more than your weight, more than your exercise habits, more than your drinking habits, even more than your smoking habits, your social relationships were the strongest predictors of human longevity. You need relationship. Your need for relationship is stronger than your need for clean air. That's pretty strong. And we know this from observing babies and adults alike. When you talk face to face with someone in real time, in real space, responsive time with another human being, your brain chemistry and theirs just lights up like a Christmas tree, lowering stress hormones like cortisol, boosting dopamine, and goodness, human touch? Goodness gracious. Like a simple high five with somebody releases in our brains a little dose, a quick dose of oxytocin. That's the one that sometimes is called the love hormone, because it's associated with creating and strengthening bonds, trust bonds with other people. It couldn't be clearer. You have always known deep down from the day your mama first smiled at you to just the other day when you hugged your friend that you are wired up for relationship. And that's really no surprise to anyone who's even just started to read the Bible. I mean, you can't even get 2 chapters in before you see God creating human community. Right there in the 2nd chapter of Genesis, you've got chapter 1, of course, which is like the quick overview of God creating the whole cosmos, the universe, creating humans as the pinnacle, the crown jewel of all that he's created, designing humans, male and female, in his image, in God's image in this world. So what does it mean to be human? Well, Genesis 1 answers that question. It means that we are mirrors. We're designed to be mirrors made to reflect the good creator of our universe into this universe. That's chapter 1. Chapter 2 comes along, and it tells the same story, only with a focus on God's creating humanity. And it tells it from a different angle, it's got a slower way of telling the story. It says God had already formed the earth, and he decides to form man out of that earth, out of the dust, the clay. And then God breathes spirit into that clump of clay, and poof, a living being, a man. Fantastic. This is excellent. But this man is alone, and that's a problem. Now, up until this point, everything that God has created has been good. Throughout chapter 1, whenever God creates something, he sees that it's good. So you've got that line just repeating multiple times. It's good, it's good, it's good. And he creates everything and it's very good. And then he sees that man is alone and that is not good. And so the force of this line is very jarring as you're reading the story. Genesis chapter 2, verse 18 says, "The Lord God said, 'It is not good for man to be alone.'" It's the only thing in all creation that's not good, the man's aloneness. It is a problem that needs to be solved. He says, "I will make a helper suitable for him." Man, that word helper is a particularly beautiful word right here. See, in our modern context, we might hear that word helper and hear some ingredients of inferiority in it, as if the one helping is less than or inferior to or underneath the one being helped. But you got to understand, the original Hebrew word, it totally lacks that kind of inferiority. That word is actually used 21 times in the Old Testament in the Bible. 2 of them are right here in this passage talking about the suitable helper that God is about to provide. But all but like 3 or 4 of the other 19 instances refer to God as the helper of his people. So you got it all through the Psalms in lines like, "God is my help and my shield. God, you are my help and my deliverer." I mean, think about that. Think about the implications of that. So when God says, "I'm going to give this poor, lonely guy a helper," it sounds like God might just have in mind for this helper to be a reflection of his help, reflected into the life of this lonely individual. That's how it is, isn't it? I mean, when we're in discomfort and even pain, God's comfort comes to us so often in the form of another flesh and blood human being. When God provides for us, he so often provides for us in the form of another person. All those people in your life, the richness of their lives in ours, all the beautiful ways they make our lives more full. That is God actively working in our lives, providing for our needs. As the psalmist asks and answers the question, says, "Where does my help come from?" My help comes from the Lord. It's not good for man to be alone, he says. "I will make a suitable helper for him." And that word translated suitable is also a really good one. It means that this can't just be any helper, but it's got to be one that corresponds to him. The essence of this word is like one who can stand right before him in a very obvious way, eye to eye, face to face, maybe sometimes even toe to toe. One who is like him. And so God forms, this apparently prompts God to form all of the animals out of the very same earth that the man was formed from. And then, of course, God presents all these animals to the man. And, think about that. Like, there are some pretty excellent candidates for companionship in the animal kingdom. I mean, that's quite a bunch, right? I mean, you got bears, right? I mean, come on, how cool would that be? I want one of those. Like, that would be excellent. The guy's got pretty awesome hair, too. But both of them have awesome. I mean, he'd eat you out of house and home, though, right? I mean, so maybe we got to downsize that a little bit, maybe a little bit more our size. Dogs are the obvious choice, right? I mean, you saw that one coming. You saw that a mile away because you know that dogs are a man's best friend. Everybody knows that. And how did they get that reputation if not by being an excellent companion to human beings, right? Cats. I've heard cats can be pretty chummy sometimes. Big ones maybe, I don't know. So God parades the whole animal kingdom in front of the man, right? And the man names each animal showing his dominion, demonstrating his superiority over the animal kingdom. But no suitable helper was to be found there, as if exerting his authority over, ruling over a kingdom of subordinates just doesn't solve his aloneness problem. Animals absolutely enrich our lives. You're talking to an animal lover. But they ultimately do not supply what the man needs, what we humans need deeply. We need someone like ourselves. No. The man here needs someone whom he knows is like himself. So what does God do? Well, maybe you remember. God puts the man into a deep sleep, removes a portion of the man's body, not apart from the head, not a part of the foot, but a portion of the man's side, which is the perfect choice when forming a companion for the man, right? And so God forms woman out of this portion that he removes from the man. And the man is like, yes, that's it. That's it. I think we've got what we're looking for now, right? And of course they go on to be married. And I realize that for someone who's single and hoping to be married, longing to be married, this moment in the story kind of sounds like the Bible is saying that marriage is the thing that will solve your loneliness problem. No, that's not what it's saying. That's not what it's saying. It knows that. You already know this. The book of Genesis, especially the first handful of chapters, is all about origins, the beginnings, the source of things. So yes, marriage was born out of the problem of man's aloneness. But that doesn't mean that marriage is the only solution to a person's aloneness. You already know it's not, right? Because I bet by now you've met plenty of people who are lonely in their marriage. Marriage doesn't magically solve one's aloneness problem. The Bible knows that. And of course, on the other side of the same coin, I hope you have had the privilege of meeting and knowing unmarried people who live their single lives richly, out of the fullness of human companionship, not out of an empty loneliness. They are unmarried for sure, but not alone. Don't call them alone. Jesus comes to mind. Unmarried for sure, but not alone. Presumably quite full of all that the human experience can offer, even taking that fullness with him into the lonely places in the wilderness where he would go to pray and commune with his heavenly Father. Paul comes to mind, that early Christian, totally instrumental in shaping the root beliefs of our faith. Paul was most likely single. He was most likely another exemplary Christian who was content in his single status. Paul goes so far as to highlight the spiritual advantages of remaining single. I mean, he flips it. He's like, my opinion is you can get married if you want to. It's not bad. You're not sinning if you get married. And matter of fact, it's even, marriage is good. He says this, but the one who holds back from marrying will do better. Wow, that's pretty strong. That's remarkably strong. And I bet if you were to pull Paul aside, and try to talk some sense into him and say, Paul, bro, dude, second chapter of the Bible says it's not good for man to be alone. You got to go get yourself married. The single celibate life is no way to live, bro. No way to live at all. I bet Paul would put his arm around you and look you in the face with a little bit of pity. And if you had ears to hear him, he might even convince you that you are the one missing out, that your mindset is interfering with. It's causing you to miss out on the kind of human fullness that God intends for you to discover. It's a fullness that you can discover within or without a marriage. Perhaps you are someone who is sexually attracted or sexually oriented toward people of the same sex. And embracing the risk of loneliness. At the risk of loneliness, you've chosen the single celibate path. And you know, in today's world, you walk a uniquely narrow path, and we believe it's a uniquely beautiful one. And you have a special kind of admiration from me. I look up to you. And I pray that your choice pays enormous dividends in the intimacy, in your intimacy with God, and in the richness of your human relationships. Longing for companionship. It's just a basic part of being human. It's so common. I mean, you would think that if it's this common, you would think that finding human companionship and developing increasingly meaningful companionship with others would just come easily for us, right? I mean, if it's a drive we all have, and failing to find meaningful connection is painful, you would think we would just be naturally evolving, that we'd naturally be getting better at this, right? Not worse. Well, there are some obstacles. There are some things that block us, that interfere with our movement toward finding meaningful companionship with others, people outside of our own skin, with other desires. And so here's a quick list of, 10 things. We'll start with 10. I'm sure you can add to it. 10 things to be aware of as we pursue companionship. Number 1, beware of your self-absorption. That's an obstacle. Your desire to have things your way, it interferes with the give and the take of meaningful companionship. No doubt about it. Number 2, beware of your increasing need for convenience. Real time and space, real flesh and blood relationships, they just aren't convenient. They demand sacrifices of various kinds. They're full of friction of all kinds that has all that friction that's got to be worked through in some way or another. And that kind of working through that might call you into deeper levels of self-denial. And that's a good thing, not a bad thing. Number 3, loneliness is a kind of emptiness. So you got to beware of addictions of consumption. Beware of those attempts to fill the emptiness, whether it's eating or buying or toy shopping or serial romancing or love addictions or inappropriate relationships. There's just so many things that we can use to fill the emptiness in an illusory or incomplete way. Number 4, beware of shame. Shame is, of course, that thing that convinces us that we are alone in our inadequacies and our failures precisely when we are not. Shame pressures us to lean away and hide from even trusted, safe people when we should be doing precisely the opposite. When you see this happening, when you feel that happening, you got to stop yourself and lean in toward those trusted people, not away from them. Number 5, and this is, of course, to steal a line from John Mark Comer. He says, the hardest things to throw away are the things that almost work. Have you noticed that? This is true in many ways and in many levels, and it's certainly true of our need for human connection. Things that almost work. Beware of the lame alternatives to connection, the counterfeits that offer the illusion of connection without the risks and costs of real connection. The cheap substitutes that almost work. Those might just be the most important things for you to get out of your life. Number 6, beware of tribalism, because tribalism is a lame alternative to real community. Tribalism, of course, creates a sense of belonging, a very real sense of belonging, by excluding and even attacking other tribes. Tribalism provides that real sense of belonging, but it comes at a cost. It shapes you bit by bit into a person who's increasingly afraid of the other, even against the other, those outside your tribe. So beware. Number 7, online connections are good. Online connections but they are better suited to serve in-person connections rather than replace in-person connections. There's plenty of studies that show this, that online connections just don't hold a candle to what you get in an in-person experience. I mean, as if you need a study to tell you that. Like, you already know this. No one would argue with this. Like, texting compared to voice-to-voice or face-to-face conversations, I mean, there's no comparison. There's no contest. And surely 2 years of Zoom conversations have taught us, like, we know that they don't hold a candle to the in-person experience. The benefits of in-person are far greater. An online church has been and continues to be a fantastic, incalculably valuable resource for us, for our whole community, especially in these last couple of years. And I know even at this moment, it continues to be extremely valuable to a large portion of our community, for whom coming to campus either isn't an option or it's not possible, or if it's not advised right now or somewhere in between. But online connections can't possibly carry the load of replacing the in-person experience. They can't possibly do that. They're better suited to serve the in-person experience. Number 8, choose the difficult path. Isolation is often the easier way. And technology, maybe you've learned this in the last couple of years, technology makes avoiding people really easy. It makes avoiding all of those interpersonal frictions that go along with interacting with real people. It makes avoiding those easy. But that's not the way that leads to fullness. The difficult way, which risks intimacy and rejection and conflict, that's the way to fullness. Number 9, if you're lonely, do not try to get yourself good friends. Don't try to collect good friends. Don't seek to find good friends. Rather, aim to be a good friend to others. And when you spend your energy aiming to be a good friend to those around you, wherever you go, I promise you, you will never be without good friends in your life. Number 10, there is no shortage of opportunities to meaningfully connect with others. Whether that's in this church or beyond, there's no shortage. I mean, here we got small groups. We're always pushing some kind of groups, right? We got small groups, we got care groups, we got rooted groups, we got community groups of 50-ish Westsiders or more. We got triads of just small handfuls, a trio of Westsiders. Like, we got all kinds of groups, and each of these environments requires time and intentionality and the risks that come with vulnerability. So take courage, jump in, and risk it. You aren't alone. It's a lie. You're not alone. You have never been alone. The very God who created you with that deep longing for connection is ever present with you in his spirit. And he is present in an even more tangible, flesh and blood way in his spirit-filled community. Here's a fun fact. Near the end of the 1st century, beginning of the 2nd century, Christians were thought by outsiders to be incestuous, accused of incest. That's the reputation the church had. Certainly not because the church was known to be unchaste, but rather because its members were known to speak of each other as brothers and sisters and greeted each other with kisses on the cheek. That's something. I mean, that just goes to show you, first of all, never underestimate the degree to which a church community, especially one that refuses to participate in the surrounding idolatry. Never underestimate the degree to which the church might be misunderstood and criticized. Number two, and more centrally, it goes to show you that the church has always been known for its counterculturally close relationships. That's a beautiful thing. The church has always been a family, bonded not by our own blood, but by the blood of the one who died for us. And believe it or not, as strong as our bloodline connections are, we believe our bond in Jesus is stronger. I like Psalm 68, which says God places the lonely in families. It's a rich line. He does this because he's good. He puts lonely people in families. And I can't help but think that God had this church in mind when he inspired that one. If you are lonely and you are hearing this message right now, you have an incredible advantage. You are in some way connected to an unbelievably rich resource, a community that God himself has provided for the lonely in this world. No, we are not a community of people who always get relationships right. You know that. But we are a community who sees right relationships as our most sacred practice. It is our mission, in fact. And no, we're probably not a group of people who are always the easiest to get along with. That'd be nice, but no, we're not dedicated to keeping the peace by avoiding conflict, but rather we are absolutely dedicated to making peace wherever we find conflict and discord. No, we're probably not a group. We're not even a group of people who sin any less than others. But you bet we are absolutely a group who are more aware of our sin and its destructiveness in our lives, and we are more dead serious about putting it to death in our lives as God refines our hearts to love like his. We are a group who is called by our Master to rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. We are called to outdo each other, competitively outdo each other in giving honor to others, not in receiving it. Called to be a refuge for orphans and widows, for the misfit and the outcast. And if by chance you have not found that to be true here, please hear this as your clarion call to make it so. We're called to love as God has loved us. And how is it that our Creator has loved us? He came to us. He stepped into our skin and flesh and blood. He walked and wept with us as our companion. He was God with us. Why? Because he knows that is precisely the kind of companionship this world needs, church. At the risk of sounding like a replay of a replay, I just can't help myself. I can't help but go back to the classic Fred Rogers exercise, Mr. Rogers exercise, where he has people take a silent minute to think of people who have loved us into being, right? He says from the time that you were very little, you've had people who have smiled you into smiling, who have talked you into talking. You've had people who have sung you into singing. And most importantly, you've had people who have loved you into loving. Who is that for you? Who is it that loved you into loving? Who are they? Who were they? With you when you were feeling alone? listening to you attentively when you were hurting, present with you in your pain, and they would have shouldered more of it if they could have. When they were with you, they were giving you an extraordinary gift of help. And when they did, God was touching your life and wiring you up to be that kind of help for others.